Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound.
Thank you. We now move to item 5, which is the draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at pages 242 to 253 of the meeting pack, and ask are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting of Thursday, the 4th of June 2026 are a true reflection of proceedings?
That's okay, no, it's fine.
Right. Okay, I'll take that as given, members. Move to the next item of business matters arising. Any? None. Moving on then to item 7, and we're back into Regulation EU 2026-1388 on plants obtained by certain new genomic techniques and their products, and the Departmental Oral Evidence. Just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard, and to refer you to pages 6 to 124 of the meeting pack and to pages 3 to 6 of table papers. A summary of the committee's previous consideration of this proposed EU Act can be found at pages 8 and 9 of the meeting pack, and the UK Government's explanatory memorandum on the published Act can be found at pages 3 to 6 of table papers. Members should be aware that while we previously considered the proposed EU Act in its entirety. The UK Government has now confirmed in both last week's notification and its EM that only Article 37 of the published EU Act falls within the scope of Article 13.3 of the Windsor Framework, and therefore only this article is under consideration. The EM states that Article 37 in isolation will have no practical impact if other parts of the regulation are not applied in Northern Ireland via Article 13.4 of the Windsor Framework. An assessment of the impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at pages 115 to 118 of the meeting pack. Can I remind members that the committee will need to take a decision on whether to hold an inquiry, and will do so following this evidence session. Then can I welcome Fiona Dickson, who's the Deputy Director of the National Environment Policy Division of DAERA, and ask her to brief the committee. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you for welcome. Good morning, Chair, Deputy Chair and committee members. As you said, I am a Deputy Director in Natural Environment Policy in DAERA. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today to discuss DAERA's assessment of impact for Regulation EU 2026-1388. I should note at the outset that the current notification relates specifically to Article 37, and you've mentioned that, which amends the Regulation EU 2017-625 on official controls. So my remarks today will primarily focus on Article 37 and the conclusions reached in the Department's assessment of impact. You may recall that officials appeared previously at the committee when the wider regulation on new genomic techniques was still under negotiation, and at that stage discussions focused on the broader policy framework established by the regulation as a whole. At that stage, today's notification is narrower in scope and relates specifically to Article 37, which has been identified as the provision amending the existing EU legislation. The Department is therefore focused in its assessment on Article 37 while taking account of the wider legislative context. Next, I'll consider what Article 37 does and what DAERA's assessment is of applying Article 37. So, Article 37 amends Regulation EU 2017-625 on official controls, and in practical terms it provides powers for the European Commission to adopt delegated and implementing acts relating to official controls and verification arrangements associated with plants obtained through certain new genomic techniques. The provision is therefore primarily enabling in nature. It does not itself introduce new obligations for consumers, change food safety standards or alter day-to-day activities in Northern Ireland. Rather, it provides a legal mechanism through which more detailed technical provisions may be adopted in the future if needed. Turning to the Department's assessment, DAERA does not consider that the application of Article 37 is likely to have a significant impact on the everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. This conclusion reflects the nature of the provision itself. Article 37 is administrative and regulatory in character and concerns powers relating to official controls and verification arrangements. While future measures adopted under those powers could have operational implications for regulators or businesses, Article 37 itself does not introduce those immediate requirements that would significantly affect citizens' day-to-day lives. For that reason, the Department concluded that the application of Article 37 would not be likely to result in a significant and persistent impact on everyday life. The Department has reached a different conclusion when considering the non-application of the regulation. Article 37 amends Regulation EU 2017-625, which already applies in Northern Ireland under the Windsor Framework. Failure to apply the provision could therefore result in regulatory divergence between Northern Ireland and the European Union in relation to official controls associated with new genomic techniques. The Department considers that such divergence could create uncertainty in the regulatory framework and have longer-term implications for the coherent operation of official controls in this area. For that reason, the Department considers that non-application presents a greater risk of significant and persistent impacts than application. I'm turning now to stakeholder engagement. The Food Standards Agency has undertaken stakeholder engagement in relation to the wider regulation. This included direct engagement with more than 200 stakeholders and additional engagement through the Northern Ireland Industry Bulletin. No responses were received through those exercises. The Department does not interpret the absence of responses as evidence, either in support of or opposition to the regulation. Given that the regulation is directly applicable as part of the Windsor Framework Agreement, further engagement will continue following publication of the regulation and will focus on awareness raising, understanding practical implementation issues and providing information to affected stakeholders. Whilst today's notification relates only to Article 37, the Department recognises that members may have an interest in the wider regulation relating to new genomic techniques. The committee has previously considered that broader framework. Having reviewed the final published regulation, the Department has not identified material changes that alter the overall conclusions previously presented to the committee. And so now, in conclusion, the Department's assessment is that Article 37 is an enabling provision relating to official controls and verification arrangements. The Department does not consider that its application is likely to have a significant impact on the everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. However, the Department considers that non-application could result in regulatory divergence and regulatory uncertainty within an area of legislation that already applies in Northern Ireland and under the Windsor framework. So thank you, and I'm happy to take members' questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Fiona. We'll take questions. If I can just start and ask if we're clear whether the UK government intends to notify regulation, the rest of the regulation at a later stage at this point?
I am uncertain of that at the moment.
No problem. Thanks for that. And could I ask, the UKG have said that the goods moving via the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme won't be affected. But in theory, you'd imagine there's some concerns around whether it will pose problems for plants that come from GB don't meet the criteria. Can you speak to that?
The assessment of impact shows that the risk of not applying could create issues with movement of goods between jurisdictions. So by applying the amendment, it will allow greater alignment with England, and it will also continue to allow alignment with EU, Scotland and Wales. So the movement of goods, it has the potential to reduce the risk that there might be with movement of goods.
So it reduces the risk for plants that will be coming this way but that wouldn't meet the criteria. It would not just stop them coming.
I think one of the things I think that is important to recognise is that the FSA are the body that looks after the safety of food. This amendment, Article 37, is specifically about introducing controls in the future. It's enabling future controls. At the moment, there's a lot of developing technology with regard to genomic techniques, and what those might look like in the future is uncertain. So this enabling regulation is really to help with controls that may be needed in the future, as opposed to the controls that there are currently in place.
Yeah, you'll understand though from our point of view, in terms of the things that enable things to happen in the future, that still presents a concern of divergence in the future. From our point of view, in terms of Northern Ireland, in general,
the Article 37 is about minimising the risk of divergence. Okay. I'll
move on to Steve then.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve, and thanks very much, Fiona, for the evidence. In the it says the Department considers Article 37 does not itself introduce substantive policy changes specific to Northern Ireland. Rather, it provides a legal mechanism through which the European Commission may adopt future technical provisions relating to official controls and verification arrangements. But we won't have any say over those, will we, if Article 37 is adopted?
I'm unsure about what say we would have, but what I would say is that if Article 37 is adopted and there's a need to introduce controls in the future for new techniques, those impacts would be assessed at that stage. So new tech, any new controls that there were would be assessed, and the impact of those would be assessed separately.
By who?
Well, if they fall in under the Department of Agriculture, if it's about official controls, but if it's to do with food safety, that lies in the remit of Food Standards Agency.
Sort of having been quite familiar with this European stuff for quite a long time, it says what it is, it's an enabling technical legislation that basically allows the European Commission to change the rules as it sees fit.
Okay, well,
that's what it says.
Yeah. So, well, then that's. I mean, I'd have to come back to you on that one.
Because actually, we have no. If Article 37 goes through, and at some stage the European Commission decides for various reasons it's going to change whatever its definition of whatever GMO or whatever the addition it has to be, that will then be automatically applied to Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
I'll have to come back to you on that one.
Well, but that's what it says.
Okay.
That's what you've said. Sort of the department considers that Article 7 does not introduce substantial policy changes. Rather, it provides a legal mechanism through which the European Commission may adopt future technical provisions. So we don't have any say on it. I would be delighted. I would like clarification on that one, but that's sort of is counter to where we're trying to get to. Okay.
I think that's sort of what I was trying to push up as well. Thanks very much, Steve. Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona. I just got two areas I want to pick up on. One's a sort of theme that the Chair just was exploring there. I understood your answer in terms of this particular regulation protecting, moving within the EU from Northern Ireland, and obviously we have some level of protection for goods moving from Northern Ireland then to GB for sale. I'm just more interested in the GB to Northern Ireland route and the implications of, for example, plants moving from the rest of GB to NI. If this was introduced, what impact would there be on those?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again?
Yeah, no problem. So I get the policy impact within the EU of stuff that falls within the criteria in Northern Ireland, and also we have protections for trade moving from Northern Ireland to GB for sale. I'm more interested in the implications of this proposal for GB to Northern Ireland trade. So someone in GB wanting to move goods to Northern Ireland, if this particular regulation was implemented, will it affect that route? I think that was probably the context of David's question, but just wasn't too sure about.
I'm not able to answer that question. I'll have to come back to you on that as well.
That's okay. No, that's okay. Just one more then, in terms of stakeholder engagement, and it's always very tough trying to flick around screens, especially when you're remote. But when I read through the pack, the UFU put a response in regarding this, and they put in a narrative. More or less what the UFU said was they needed more info, I think at all levels, was the thing that I've written down here in terms of the impact of this policy. Would you accept that as a response from the UFU? Does that have any concerns for you? That they need significantly more level of detail, and then also maybe what engagement DAERA has had with the UFU directly on it?
Yeah, so the FSA has carried out significant stakeholder engagement, including with UFU, and obviously that's where their responses come from. We are always happy to engage with stakeholders, and we regularly engage with the UFU on a wide range of matters. So at the moment, there were no significant concerns that came back to the FSA, and we're working really closely with them in terms of their stakeholder engagement, and we're happy to review any concerns that have been raised and to take forward stakeholder engagement as needed.
Okay. Would you accept that perhaps if before this would proceed, that more detail would need to be provided to the UFU to enable them to get to a position on this issue?
Yes, we'd be happy to engage with the UFU. As I say, we do regularly on a wide range of issues, and we can pick that one up with them.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Philip?
So, I can't predict the future, what's likely to come in the future, so I want to deal with what we need to understand and know about today. So, I mean, this legislation or proposed change is about making things more adaptable for future changes to improve the standards. I mean, essentially that's what it's about. Am I correct in that?
It is about making a provision for controls to be introduced where they may be needed when new technologies and new products come on board.
Which all sounds eminently sensible. And in terms of the situation here, would the department's view is, having done all the consultation and done all the engagement, is that if we were not to go along the route proposed by this change, it would provide significant impact, as opposed to if we go along with the route, there'd be no significant impact?
That is correct. It would, if we do not introduce it, there's a risk of greater regulatory divergence, and that poses risks to the regulatory framework going forward.
And that's the information that we know right here today. I have no idea what's going to happen in the future, so I'm not here to make proposals about what happens in the future. So I think you've been very clear, and I appreciate you coming before us.
Thank you. I have no other indications at the moment. Just remains then to thank Fiona for her presentation. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Members, under paragraph 8.1 of Schedule 6B to the 1998 Act, the committee must decide today whether to hold an inquiry into the published replacement EU Act that has been notified. Should the committee fail to decide, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold an inquiry. Having regard to one, the legal advice on whether it appears likely that the replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or in part from the content or scope of the EU instruments which it amends or replaces, and two, the departmental assessment on whether it appears likely that the replacement Act would have significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. Do members wish to hold an inquiry into Article 37 of Regulation EU 2026-1388? Peter?
Thank you very much, Chair. I propose we do hold an inquiry based on the fact that I don't think it's clear what the impact of goods moving from GB to Northern Ireland is, and also it is not clear what the view of the major stakeholders are, i.e. the UFU, and they've made absolutely clear that they require more information on this. So an inquiry would be, my view, sensible at this point.
Thanks, Peter. Steve?
Yeah, just to further on Article 37, just reading on the EMs, reading on the information that we have, there seems to be an awful lot of degree of uncertainty about this. And actually, as this a technical amendment that opens up to a wide variety of changes and the rest, not to hear from the principal stakeholders, I think it would be remiss of us as a committee.
Thank you, Steve. Phil.
I not surprisingly take a contrary view. It doesn't meet any of the criteria. The legal advice is that there's no significant difference. The department and the explanatory memorandum are saying that there's no impact. In fact, what they're actually saying is that if we don't apply this, it will have a significant difference. And the issue of, so in no sense does it meet any of the criteria for an inquiry in the first instance. And secondly, if we had an inquiry, the information that people are saying they don't have, they aren't going to get in this period time frame of an inquiry, because it just doesn't exist.
Thank you. The only element of that I think we might be able to get advice on is what it means for those things coming in from GB, which the official wasn't able to provide today. I'm concerned about, but Padraig, you've indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I agree with that, but I mean, I don't think the outcome's clear of what an inquiry, I cannot say that word today, would bring, and I'm not sure that if we're not actually clear on the outcome and the benefits of that, I don't really understand why we would bring one forward. So again, I hold the same view on that. I don't think it's beneficial, and I don't think that it's going to bring any more knowledge or any more understanding to us as a committee, or indeed to the issue.
Thanks, Padraig. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just following on from those points that further to not meeting the test for the inquiry, I was reassured by the commitment that the officials will continue to engage with stakeholders, so that there will be continued engagement, and those stakeholders will be able to raise those directly with the department. I don't think we need an inquiry when that is going to be happening already, as it is.
No problem, thanks, Kate. No further indications, and I think we're clearly going to divide. So,
okay. So the question is: are you proposing an inquiry?
Yeah, I think Peter's proposing an inquiry, and Steve seconded it.
Okay. So the question is an inquiry into Regulation EU 2026/1388 on plants obtained by certain genomic techniques and their products. Ayes. Okay, noes?
No.
That's okay.
You need to see your hand, Ciara. You need to see your hand.
Okay, the ayes we have 3, the noes
No.
we have the noes we have 4, so there'll be no inquiry.
And with that, we move on to the next item of business. Let's just check. Thanks, members. We now move on to Regulation EU 2026 and 1392 on the production and marketing of forestry reproductive material. And this is the Departmental Oral Evidence. Again, to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard, and to refer members to pages 126 to 240 of the meeting pack, and a summary of the committee's previous consideration of the proposed EU Act can be found at page 128 of the meeting pack. An assessment of the impact from DAERA on the published EU Act can be found at pages 224 to 234 of the meeting pack, and the UK Government's EM can be found at pages 200 to 206 of the meeting pack. Can I remind members that the committee will need to take a decision on whether to hold an inquiry into this published replacement of the EU Act, and will do so following the evidence session. So it just remains for me to welcome John Joe O'Boyle, Chief Executive of the Forest Service with DAERA, and Charmaine Beer, Head of Plant Health Division DAERA, and ask you both to brief committee. Welcome.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, declaration of interest. John and I were talking just the other day on bees.
That's it.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
there we go.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Charmaine, and I thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on Regulation EU 2026-1392 of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 20th of May 2026 on the production and marketing of forest reproductive material, which is known as FRM Regulation. We understand that the committee have received an updated copy of the DAERA's assessment and of the impact of the regulation, and also the explanatory memorandum dated the 30th of June 26, prepared by DEFRA. I'm going to hand over to Charmaine, Head of the Plant Health, to present our evidence, following which we'll be happy to take any members' queries or questions.
Okay, thank you. So this regulation amends EU 2016-2031 and EU 2017-625 and repeals Council Directive 1999-105 EC. It will apply from the 17th of July 2031. I'll give you an overview of forest reproductive material and the current Northern Ireland position, along with a summary of the scope and impacts of the new regulation. So the new regulation maintains the previous principle of approval and certification, but modernises the 1999 FRM framework to consider climate change challenges, enhanced biosecurity and technological advances. It retains much of the previous system, which is based on international standards. The EU will also bring forward further implementing and delegated acts. Forest reproductive material, or FRM, includes seeds, parts of trees and planting stock used to grow and plant new trees for forestry purposes. The production and marketing of FRM in Northern Ireland is overseen by DAERA Plant Health in Forest Service. So FRM placed on the market must be produced from approved basic material, meaning that the source of the material can be verified and is selected for superior characteristics such as morphology, wood quality, health and resistance. New characteristics that will now be considered include adaptation of the material to local climatic and ecological conditions and its freedom from pests and their symptoms. Northern Ireland has a small number of sites in Derry, Down and Armagh producing basic material, with 4 stands and 2 seed orchards, all of which Forest Service manage for FRM on behalf of DAERA. In 2025, 32 master certificates required for the collection of FRM were issued by DAERA to 4 organisations in Northern Ireland: Megaligan Tree Nursery, the Conservation Volunteers, Forest Service and Mourne Heritage Trust, resulting in the collection of under 300 kilograms of material. The material collected here is usually for organisations to develop and grow their own material for planting and not for wider marketing purposes. There are only 29 FRM suppliers who can harvest or market FRM, registered with DAERA, and figures show activity is low. Currently, most of the FRM planted in Northern Ireland is imported from authorised suppliers in the Republic of Ireland. The new regulation extends the definition of FRM from the previously unspecified forestry purposes to intended use for afforestation, reforestation, diversification of a forest plot and other tree planting and direct seeding. Agroforest and hedgerow planting are excluded. The number of species has been increased with the new regulation, however not all of the additions are grown in the UK, therefore it's not anticipated that the additional species will cause a significant impact to operators in Northern Ireland. Specific provisions on the official controls for FRM are included in this regulation for requirements to comply with plant health rules concerning official controls, pests and their associated risks. These are existing requirements already, but are now explicitly included in this regulation to ensure consistency with other EU acts concerning the production and marketing of plants. With regard to professional operators wishing to market FRM, lots must now be accompanied by an official label authorised by DAERA, which confirms it meets quality requirements. DAERA can issue these or authorise operators to print their own. The regulation will provide operators with the ability to combine the official label with the EU plant passport for movement of FRM. By creating this combination, it will reduce administrative and labelling burdens for operators. Record-keeping requirements under the new regulation are for 10 years rather than 5 years. The finalised regulation includes voluntary options for Member States to devise a contingency plan for supply of FRM for their own territory to reforest areas affected by extreme weather events, wildfires, disease or pest outbreaks, disasters or any other extreme event. Initially, in proposals, this was to be mandatory. This new option is not expected to be required as Forest Service has a good supply and contingencies in place for FRM supply. This will be kept under review as further information comes forward through the EU implementing and delegated acts. The regulation sets out that FRM may be imported from a third country, provided it fulfills requirements equivalent to those applicable to FRM produced and marketed within the Union. This is a continuation of previous regulation and requires a third country to participate in the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development OECD scheme for the certification of forest reproductive material moving in international trade, which GB does. It is therefore not anticipated that there would be divergence between certification standards in GB and NI. There is also a new requirement on Member States to report every 5 years to the Commission on aspects relating to FRM, including the annual quantities of FRM produced, volume imported and details of any contingency plans. Officials will be required to evaluate and approve basic material against a wider criterion based on climate adaptation, pest resistance and ecological stability. The requirements will not be particularly burdensome or costly for DAERA to comply with due to the small volume of FRM being produced and marketed here and recording processes that are already in place. Subsequently, DAERA's assessment on this published regulation is that it is likely that it will not have a significant impact specific to the everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Likewise, should the regulation not be applied in Northern Ireland, it will not have a significant impact specific to the everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. However, if not applied, there is potential that Northern Ireland produced FRM in the future could be considered unsuitable or lacking in quality assurance, which could impact trade and exports, even though this is currently minimal. It could also result in poor quality or material suitable for the Northern Ireland environment being imported or received, which could curtail the ability to demonstrate meeting the UK forestry certification standard. This standard states it's a legal requirement to comply with FRM regulations and as such is required for Northern Ireland forestry activity, including tree planting under DAERA grant aid. The UK government in its assessment has indicated that without the EU's implementing and delegated acts, there cannot be a full analysis of the impact of some changes until these acts and details are available. The regulation does make reference to these future pieces of legislation and indicates that the Commission may make implementing acts, including those for setting out the format and processing of labelling, the use of electronic forms, requirements for voluntary contingency plans, and outlining authorisation procedures. The previous EU Directive 1999-105, which this regulation repeals, was transposed and retained in GB law prior to EU exit. The UK government stated in its EN that it's unlikely there'll be divergence between certification standards, as these are largely based on the international standards. As the regulation does not come into effect for 5 years, DAERA and DEFRA will monitor the EU's implementing and delegated acts and engage closely with stakeholders to plan for full implementation and any further resourcing requirements. Thank you for hearing our evidence, and of course we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you for your presentation, and first indication from Steve.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just a couple of ones, just going through this bits and pieces. It says that generation FRM in Northern Ireland is relatively small, and its material is included for forestry is mostly sourced for the Republic of Ireland and sort of replanting in commercial forest like up in Ballybully and the rest of it. You can always see they leave all the packages left all over the place, littering the place everywhere with stuff from the ROI. But is there any other areas that coming into that in Northern Ireland that, particularly if we're looking at native species and the rest of it, are there any other sort of areas apart from the Forestry Commissioner or the Forestry Service are doing that?
Most of the trees used in Northern Ireland for planting up sites are coming from suppliers already, and they already require to have verification and meet standards associated with where they've come from, etc. And so they're coming in from those sort of registered suppliers. Some are coming from GB, some are coming from the ROI, and most of those have to meet the requirements of, for example, the forestry grant schemes for planting out there. So those grant schemes themselves require that FRM to be in those standards to be in place. Yep.
And of course, and you were saying there wasn't a significant cost for all the extra labelling and all the rest of it has done it, because just reading sort of some of the information, specific labels with QR codes on it, with all the other kind of stuff. So that you don't think that's going to be a significant cost?
There's two options with the labelling. The operator can print the labels themselves, and a lot of businesses would be regularly doing that for all sorts of requirements that exist already. But also DAERA can print the labels on their behalf as well.
Okay, sort of Northern Ireland nurseries, because I'm aware that local government gets a lot of their stuff from Northern Ireland nurseries, including some in my constituency in South Antrim. And there's a big market in sort of providing trees, hedging, all that sort of issues as well. So providing they comply, because that's within Northern Ireland, that's using native species or the local species, whatever it is, they're not going to have to comply with these rules and regulations.
It depends on the what they're being planted for. So if it's within forestry, yes. If it's hedgerows and things, that's excluded. But if it's actually forestry and woodland creation,
the key is 0.2 of a hectare or something like that. So if it's anything bigger than that, they have to, and anything lower than that, it's okay.
And one of the things they've clarified in this regulation, different member states were applying the definition of what forestry purposes was. So they've put more definition to this regulation to make sure that rule is applied more uniformly across the member states.
Okay. And are we sort of growing enough trees of native species in Northern Ireland to be able for reforestation and replanting and the rest of it?
So the trees that are planted in Northern Ireland are largely coming from the south of Ireland. So
Yeah.
the four organisations that I mentioned, so the three organisations that I mentioned, which aren't Forest Service, McGilligan, Conservation Volunteers, Moan Heritage Trust, they tend to be growing for their own planting projects. Anything.
The Woodland Trust and the rest of it, when they get their trees, where do they get them
They're
from?
usually coming in from the south.
Okay, so they're not actually native trees, they're coming from the south.
They're native to the island, and that would be the definition that would be used in forestry. Yeah.
Things like orchards and apple trees and stuff like that.
It's not within this. There's other regulations around that.
Okay, so it's just the Forestry
It's
Commission.
the forestry bit that's this regulation's about. Yeah.
Okay, and how much comes from GB into Northern Ireland?
Currently, very little.
Okay.
Not for forestry.
Generally, it's so we say not for forestry. What time is?
Well, you might have people importing trees for planting in gardens and things like that.
Okay,
yeah.
right. So what we're really talking about is the importation of stuff that comes into the south for commercial forestries and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And we don't do that at scale.
We don't grow that at scale in the north, no.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. Any further, Peter?
Get my audio on. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Could I ask, just in the first instance, what level of consultations have been carried out with sort of stakeholders in Northern Ireland regarding the directive?
With this, the EU did a consultation, obviously, as they were developing this proposal, and we're told there were responses on behalf of the UK. We haven't done any direct engagement on this yet. It's just been published, and we've got 5 years to implement, so ourselves and DAERA will work closely now with any stakeholders. It's a small community of people here who are involved in this work, the three organisations that we would work hand in hand with anyway. So we'll be working with them as this comes. The changes for them are probably not too major compared to what they're doing already, because they're already involved in the scheme. It's not new to them.
Okay. So just from your answer there is a small number. I think you mentioned those on the way through there. In terms of this directive, has DAERA reached out for a view from them in terms of the implications of it?
No, we haven't done that bit yet. We're going to be doing that as the regulation's now been finalised and it's slightly different to the proposal. Then we'll do that now over the next 5 years of implementation to make sure everyone's ready.
Okay, but I think just in your answer there, you're assuming that this will be implemented. Obviously, the committee has to make a decision on whether or not we have an inquiry first, and then evidence from those affected would be obviously useful in terms of generating a committee view on whether to have an inquiry, which is what we're doing today. But so the three organisations that you mentioned on the way through there, they don't have a view yet, or you haven't asked them for a view yet in terms of this new directive?
No.
Okay, that's fine. You mentioned just as well that most of the movement of goods regarding this in terms of tree stock comes from the Republic of Ireland. Is that right currently?
Yes.
Yeah. So if this directive was implemented, what would the implications if someone who owned a forest or had a forest wanted to import some level of tree stock as per this directive from GB?
Because GB, they've sort of made an equivalent standard, so that trade can still be permitted because the standard that they're reaching under the OECD, and they've kept that since they left the EU. They've kept that part, so there isn't actually a barrier there.
Okay, so essentially, if this was put in place, this would have, just to be clear, no impact on someone in Northern Ireland wanting to buy tree stock from GB.
Forestry, it would be the same standard, so it's deemed equivalent in this regulation as a third country. Yeah. So if any third country meets that equivalent standard as agreed, then it's fine. Yeah, that material can move.
Okay, it's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. I have no further implications at this stage. Just thank you then for your evidence, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Committee, under paragraph 8.1 of Schedule 6B of the 1988 Act, the committee must decide today whether to hold an inquiry into the published replacement EU Act that has been notified. Should the committee fail to decide, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold an inquiry. Can I ask, having regard to 1, the legal advice on whether it appears likely that the Replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or in part from the content or scope of the EU instruments which it amends or replaces, and two, the departmental assessment on whether it appears likely that the Replacement Act would have significant impacts specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. Do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2026-1392? No. No. No.
No. Peter?
Yeah, Chair. I mean, I think we should monitor this one just to make sure that. I was a little bit confused by what the official said at the end there, and I would like a wee bit more detail. I mean, she seemed to suggest that if this came in, then there would be no impact. Maybe that's the case, but I would like more detail on that. And also, for that matter, I think it would be worth hearing from at least the people who are currently the 3 organisations, and they might be fine with it. But I think the officials made it pretty clear that they hadn't actually engaged with the stakeholders to find out their views. And I think we should do that.
So Peter, can I take that as a proposal to hold an inquiry? No problem. I would have similar concerns around this sort of idea of consulting after the fact, whenever we have no levers to do anything about it.
Be too late.
But Clark advised me that the DAERA committee can be advised that this has been published and do some of that work. But I'm happy to second the proposal in terms of an inquiry, and on that basis we will divide.
Okay, so the question is that the committee conducts an inquiry into Regulation EU 2026-1392 on the production and marketing of forest reproductive material. Can we have ayes? David and Peter. Noes. We have Ciara, Padraig, Philip and Steve. So that's 2, 4 noes. There'll be no inquiry.
Thank you, committee. And
can I just check? Are members content that we just advise the DAERA committee that that the Act has been published and it may wish to take an interest?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Oh, sorry, Kate, you were a no as well. 5, apologies.
Through the Deputy Chair, yeah, I understand that Robbie's probably already aware of this, so I think it'd be useful to let them know about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Moving on then to the next item of business, and it's committee travel. I'll invite Chris to provide an update on planning for the committee's proposed visit to Brussels in the autumn.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. Just a quick update from me on the planning for this visit. So members will know that at our last meeting, the committee agreed to explore options for a visit to Brussels in October, with a focus on engaging with the Council of the EU and the UK Mission and Permanent Representation of Ireland as kind of key interlocutors with those bodies. We as a Secretariat have written out to members with options for a few possible date ranges in October. The responses at the minute that have come in don't indicate a clear preference between the ones that are there, and there's kind of different preferences among members. So we've asked the Office of the NI Executive in Brussels, could they come back with a steer on when might work best practically in terms of logistics of a visit, but also when might be most suitable for meeting with some of those stakeholders. They've indicated in particular with the Permanent Representation of Ireland, just given the Council presidency, their time and availability might be at a bit of a premium. So they're going to come back having spoken to their contacts with some information on what they think might be optimal there. So we'll keep members posted on that. In the meantime, Deputy Chair, it's more just of a procedural point, which is that generally the committee, when we're agreeing sort of steps on travel, will do it during a committee meeting and agree formal written proposals during the committee meeting. But with summer recess, our opportunities to do that are slightly more limited. So with that in mind, Deputy Chair, I just welcome views of you in the committee on whether you'd be content to agree any of those formal steps via correspondence if needed during the recess. Any comments on that, members, first of all?
Content for correspondence.
Yeah. So members are content to agree any formal travel proposal for the visit to Brussels via correspondence if required during the recess. Content? Thanks, members. Moving on then. Committee work planning. Refer members to The work planning document at pages 258 to 269 of the meeting pack. Are members content to note? Noted. Moving on to item 11, it's correspondence. To inform members, there are 38 items of correspondence at pages 270 to 403 of the meeting pack. I wish to draw your attention to item 11.1 at page 273. One second, members. My computer sent me out. So. Yeah, I'm grand. I was just getting the password in and so on. So yes, draw attention to item 11.1 at page 273. It is a response from the Secretary of State and the Minister for Cabinet Office to the committee's letter of 16th January regarding funding and the work undertaken by the Northern Ireland Civil Service Departments in support of the committee. Are members content that the response is forwarded to the Executive Office for information? Do members have any comments on the remaining items of correspondence?
Yes, I have, Chair. Several.
No problem.
Okay, if I first refer to item of correspondence 1116 from the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee, it's talking about a proposal for regulation, monitoring and control drug precursors. And thank goodness the House of Lords is actually doing quite a lot of this detailed work. It's a question of the fact that the proposed regulation and the text of the proposed regulation has not yet been finalised, yet we're being invited to think about scrutinising it. And within it, it talks about a new implication of a new central EU electronic system for Northern Ireland, which of course we've got no knowledge of or no detail of, and the steps that the government will take to minimise regulatory divergence in respect to this regulation. This is, again, it's not a completely added burden onto our health service. And there's actually very little detail has been given to us or any sort of facts has been to the rest. So that's item 1116. Item 1117 again from the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee. It talks particularly when we're looking about acceleration of industrial capacity and decarbonisation in strategic sectors. And it talks again about reference to union origin and the fact that the EU Commission may limit UK access should it fail to provide reciprocal national treatment for any supply security arrangements that may emerge, and there's a risk that some UK-made components may count towards the required threshold of the EU procurement or support schemes, and that the Industrial Accelerator Fact talks about issues to do with automotive, nuclear fission, hydrogen, sustainable chemicals. The question is, how big is the risk to us, and both to Northern Ireland, and particularly when it's in this, and will UK-made components not count towards the required thresholds? So that makes things quite difficult, particularly in the aerospace industry, and I make a declaration of interest as the chair of the all-party group in aerospace. That's a particular concern that I have, and it's something we should be taking concern of as well. And again, I thank the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee for picking up on that one. Again, we've had nothing from the government to say, here's a problem and it's on its way, but thank you them for doing that. The next one is on item 1120, which again from the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee. It's regarding the proposal for regulation and simplification of harmonisation rules in artificial intelligence. It's quite curious, but it says if a decision is made to add the AI Act to the Windsor framework, this would be regarding to the AI Act in its original format or in its amendment format. And that question is, that's not within the withdrawal agreement yet, but there's an indication that the European Union is trying to put the AI Act with the withdrawal agreement. Again, this will be really substantial and affect our fintech industry, our cybersecurity industry, affect just about every single thing we do. We've been told time and time again that sort of the Windsor framework is about trying to improve sort of trade and businesses. This is anti-competitive. So again, this is something we should have concerns about, and areas that I have real concerns about how this is going to. But also, we're not being told about it.
I have to say, having been to the parliamentary partnership and party discussions around AI there, which I know is not the most high-level body, but it would worry me to be aligned with the EU on this, given that they seem to have a significant degree of naivety around AI and what's coming in the future.
And the bit that also says that there will be an automatic submission. There will be an automatic submission of an EM when the European Commission communicates its desire to the UK government that it wishes to apply new EU legislation to Northern Ireland of the Protocol. Wasn't it the role of the sort of the joint committees to make sure that there wouldn't be any changes to it or automatic things unless all things have been considered? Again, it's yet again, it's another area that I'm very concerned about, and it's thinking, we as a committee should be taking a close eye on.
Just before the clerk speaks, just the note that I'm the deputy chair of the ADS APG as well. So,
I mean, obviously, we're going to be copied into those responses, so that's something we can highlight once we get the responses that we put into members' pack for information, and then you can consider at that stage if there's anything else that you want to do, unless you have any further questions to what they've asked.
It's just through the Deputy Chair, it's that there was 38 items of correspondence came through to us for this committee meeting. These were actually buried in other areas, so we had to go through quite a lot of detail to pull them out. None of these are being highlighted except for the fact that the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee has, it was a word search that said we have grave concerns or we have considerable concerns. Why isn't this being picked up by other people?
I think you're right to note and be thankful for the work that's been undertaken by the House of Lords Committee and the useful information that they provide. I know it's a frustration of yours, and but I think the remit of this committee is quite tight, but there are certainly significant issues that need to be considered in the relevant forum.
I mean, some of those ones you've mentioned, for example, the drug precursors, that the committee is actually monitoring those. We've already received legal advice, we've received an assessment of impact, and agreed to monitor. So if there's any change to the legislation, it works through the legislative process, that will come back to the committee.
Yeah. It's just that, I mean, I haven't read anywhere in sort of anything we've had about the new EU electronic system. I hadn't read any of that. I hadn't any, and I think I'm reasonably assiduous at sort of looking at this information that's coming through. That's the first time I picked up on it, was the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee.
Are we aware of whether the Health Committee and so on is looking at that? Or?
Well, Philip.
No, right now.
Sorry. Through the chair. We have the chair of the Health Committee in front of us in here.
Yeah, but I'm here in my role.
Yes, no, that's fair. I'm not looking questions from you. It was more a thought of whether we should notify the
and it's
committee.
not legislation yet, so it's still going through the legislative process.
And I think I would have a lot of sympathy in the views expressed, but even in terms of the EU's wish to include AI within that, I think that's at a much higher level than necessarily this committee can be dealing with. But I think the concerns are justifiable. Could I ask, Steve, is there any particular proposal coming out other than your views will be on record?
No, the proposal I would bring in. Sorry, I'll make a proposal afterwards.
Thank you. I'm chair of the all-party group on AI and have a real interest in this. I'm conscious that we are monitoring aspects of this within the committee, and it's within this committee, but also it's still moving. We don't have a lot of clarity yet. So I'm perfectly happy that we pay attention to what happens, but if we can use the all-party group, and I think where this actually probably sits best is the Executive Office have been sitting on the draft AI strategy for Northern Ireland since December, and that still hasn't been published. So this is going to have more relevance for the Executive Office and the Economy Committee in my view. But it's rapidly evolving, and I think it's hard to keep pace of it all. But when the legislation comes through, I think there'll be more to say probably.
Thanks, Kate.
Sorry, another declaration. I'm the deputy chair of the AI committee. Sorry about that, Kate. Yeah. I think the proposal I would like is that our staff look through the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee concerns, and those are brought together in one document, and the same way, or maybe get raised to look at the concerns at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, and those are highlighted as action points for us to be aware of, because we're not picking up on them.
Anything that has been notified to the committee, work has been carried out. I just want to assure you of that. Everything has come to the committee, and the committee has made its decision on whether it wanted to monitor or not, and raise they provide us with the monitoring reports. There's quite a few. So any changes to the legislation, we do pick up on that. So the NI Affairs Committee considers a lot of stuff that I suppose, to be blunt, is outside the remit of this committee. So I suppose when it comes to resources, you're asking staff to look at areas that are outside remit.
My formal proposal will be that we ask RAISE to look at the issues of concern raised by the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, and those are highlighted to this committee as they come through, rather than us having to trail through 600 pages of documents. And
I'd probably be more content with that proposal than the initial one in terms of asking RAISE to look at that.
Yeah.
Personally. Kate, is your hand up from last time, or is it?
It's a new one.
All right, okay.
I actually shared the sentiments of Steve because I'm interested in this area, but I'm just conscious that the team who staff this committee have so much on as it is, and I wonder if it's maybe not more appropriate if we use our own resources as MLA's, research team, and make the individual request to RAISE to commission research that way. I'm worried that it then sets a precedent for any other policy areas that, of course, will have that will be important, but aren't necessarily within the remit of this committee. So I agree with the sentiment, and I would like to know more, but I wonder if that's maybe something that would be better commissioning individually, and our own teams looking at what's coming through House of Commons, and especially if people have colleagues who are MPs in Westminster, there is additional support there that maybe the resource just isn't within the committee at the moment.
Yeah, no, and that to some degree was my concern around the information being useful and so on, but placing too much weight on the team that staff this committee in terms of it's quite a wide piece of work that goes into and could evolve quite quickly. So I agree with that, whilst understanding the significance of the work. Padraig?
Yeah, look, I agree with Kate's proposal. I think it is obviously outside the scope of this committee. I think it's up to individual MLAs if they want to do that, work away, and I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to hearing the results of that. Look, it's up to the individual MLAs. I don't think we can be taking on the work as a committee. There's enough to be doing. People have a specific interest in it.
I think the proposal at this stage is to ask RAISE to look at it rather than the committee team. The initial one involved our committee, but no, you don't think so? Okay.
I mean, I don't agree with that either. I think that, the RAISE team, like I put on the thing to RAISE last week, and just from speaking to them, I'm conscious of the pressure that they're under, particularly around legislation. For me, it's very much, if members have an individual interest in this, work away. But I don't think that as a committee, it's certainly not my priority. And I don't know if other members feel the same, but I just think we all have our own resources and our own ability to do it. If people want to do it, bring in all the, I'm sure, very interesting information to this committee.
Well, look, I personally, I think it's probably more than just relevant to individual MLAs to go away and look at. I think it is something we need to have a focus on. But I do have some questions around if we're asking RAISE to look at something, what is the focus of that? Where is that information coming to do? What is there to drive? Rather than just putting a huge amount of work into a huge and very wide area to give us a report that then we don't necessarily have the functions to do anything with, and we would be then looking to other committees to do that. And I know that's a frustration of Steve that we don't do that work, but it nevertheless is the case. Can we suggest that the clerk can speak to RAISE and come back at a future meeting with a report of what they think is worthwhile doing and feasible in this, and that'll give us time as well to consider where we think the correct place to steer that is. Or would members be happy with that proposal? So there's no commitment that work is going to be undertaken in this, but that the clerk is willing to speak to RAISE to see what they can do in this area and where it might be best placed. Okay. Ciara?
Just members, I think we need to stick to what the core remit of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee. I understand Steve, and I think we all have concerns around AI. And as David had mentioned when we met at the Parliamentary Partnership, there's still a range of high-level conversations. Me and David would differ, but likewise, it's for other departments. So I don't believe that us as a committee should be contacting RAISE to do additional work that's not really the remit of this committee.
So
I've made a proposal.
How we go with, okay. So Steve, are you going with the original proposal or a proposal that we can speak to Reyes and see what they can do to come back with a report to the future?
Happy to speak to Reyes and see what they can do.
Okay,
yeah.
So we'll go with that. Members divide on that proposal. Do you want to? Sorry.
Okay.
Just give the clerk a minute to write down the necessary details.
Okay. So the question put by Steve is the clerk would speak to Reyes to consider what work they could do in relation to looking at the work of the NI Affairs Committee. Ayes? Noes? Sorry, could you do that again? I just missed when I put my head down.
All the rest.
Okay. So ayes we have 3, noes we have 4. So the proposal falls.
Thank you very much, members. Moving on then to, are people content to note the rest of the correspondence? Yeah, agreed. Moving on then to item 12, which is chairperson's business. Can I refer members to a copy of the correspondence from the UK Government to the Speaker regarding the withdrawal agreement, Windsor Framework and Governance Amendment Regulations 2026 at pages 8 and 9 of table papers. A copy of the statutory instrument, which was laid in Parliament on Monday, can also be found at pages 10 to 14 of the table papers. If the SI is affirmed by Westminster, the deadline for the committee to decide whether to launch an inquiry into an amendment, amending or replacement EU Act will be extended from 5 to 10 working days. The deadline for publishing an inquiry report would also be extended by 3 working days. Cabinet Office officials have indicated that it is expected to come into effect in the autumn. The Secretariat will consider the implications of the SI and on the committee's processes and procedures and revert back to the committee. So in the meantime, are members content to note?
Happy to note.
Happy to note. No bother. Thank you, members. We'll move on to the next item of business, which is any other business. Do members have any other business? No. Then the next item of business is date, time of next meeting. Just to remind members, the committee requested a pause in notifications for today. There are no notifications that have been received, and there will be no meeting of this committee next week. The next meeting is provisionally scheduled to take place on Thursday, the 23rd of July, 2026 at 10 a.m. in room 30 in Parliament Buildings. And that just remains for me then to adjourn the meeting and ask the Secretariat to close the meeting. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 sound.